or at school for those children in the school-going age group. So we are saying a period of rapid brain development occurs in the first years of life. So we are saying the quality of children's home environment and their interactions with caregivers is a major determinant on their development during this period. So basically we have got some 3 indicators: engaging children in activities, exposing children to books in the early years, and then inadequate supervision. Right, so when children are engaged in some activities, they tend to develop faster, which can also have a positive bearing on their learning outcomes. Right, so here we are looking at children aged 2 to 4 years with whom adult household members engaged in activities that promote learning and school readiness during the 3 days preceding the survey. So we were asking questions whether an adult in the household has ever engaged in some activities with the child. And these include, the activities, they include reading books or looking at picture books with the child, telling stories to the child, singing songs to the child, taking children outside the home, compound or yard, and playing with the child, with the child, and spending time with the child, naming, counting, or drawing things. So here we are looking at children 2 to 4 years. And remember, in Zimbabwe, our school age population starts at 3 years. But here we are saying we are starting at 2 years because we are saying at that early age, we're supposed to initiate our children to start liking the learning environment. So we were asking if there was any adult in the household who engaged in those activities with the child in the last 3 days preceding the date of our interview. And then we went further to ask if the child engaged in those activities, wanted to know who in particular engaged in those activities with the child. So we found out that about 37% of the children engaged in at least 4 of the activities which I've enumerated. And then we found that of those children who engaged in those activities, 3.4% engaged in them with the father, and then 18% engaged in those activities with the mothers. So we find that the father's engagement with the children is very low compared to the mother's engagement with the children. I don't know if it is expected or it's a surprise finding. And then learning materials at home. So here we're looking at the presence of children's books in the household. Here we are looking at books which are meant to be for the child and not just books for any other children who are older. Because they say if a child can see other older children, brothers and sisters reading or studying in the home, they also develop interest going forward in studying. So we are looking at the presence of children's books in the home. So nationally, we find that about 5% of the children had books for them in the household. And then we find that in between Bulawayo and Harare, that's where we had the highest prevalence of the books, of the presence of books in the household. Bulawayo was 8.2%, Harare was 7.7%, and then the least provinces with children with reading books was in Midlands, 1.3%, and Mat North had 1.4%. And then inadequate supervision. So this indicator points to whether the children are being afforded adequate care in the home. So our question Our questionnaire was on asking if a child under 5 years was left alone, right? Was left alone or left under the supervision of another child who was younger, was 10 years of age or below, for at least an hour during the past week preceding the survey. So that's what we meant by inadequate supervision. So it's a pointer to say when children are left unattended, they are bound to play with dangerous tools in the household. They play with fire, they end up being burnt all over the building, they end up destroying household equipment. So this is an indicator which points to well-being of children. So you find that across the country, inadequate supervision was very low, so to say. For Blawa, it was 2.4%, and then it was highest in March Central, whereby 12.2% of children were left alone for a period exceeding 1 hour in the past week. And then in Harare, it was 7%. And then children who were left under the supervision of another child younger than 10 years was also highest, was highest in Midlands Province, 22.6%. So it means parents would would be busy somewhere else. Parents, guardians, and wards, they would be busy somewhere else, so they would leave the child in the care of another child who is 10 years and below. And then we are calling it inadequate supervision. Right. So we also collected information on the child's development at home, whereby we were asking the parents or the caregivers of children under 5 years several questions regarding literacy or numeracy, development of the child, physical development of the child, their social, emotional connection with the other children in the community, and then also how they perceive the child to be learning things around them. So basically here we are talking of an early childhood development index, right? So I'll just give examples of the questions which we asked in the survey, and then how we arrived at the index which we are presenting on the slide there. So we've got 4 domains which we looked at. The first one is literacy, numeracy. So we asked the mothers or the caretakers of the children under 5 years if the child can identify or name at least 10 letters of the alphabet. That's one. Whether they can read at least 4 simple popular words, and whether they know the name and recognize the symbols of all numbers from 1 to 10 to say this is 1 finger, these are 2 fingers, things like that. So if the child was able to do at least 2 of these 2 activities, then the child was considered to be developmentally on track in the literacy, numeracy domain. So I've said we've got 4 domains. So the next domain is on physical development. So questions were on if the child can pick a small object with 2 fingers from the ground or from a table. If the child, so if they can pick up a small object from, with 2 fingers from the ground, like a stick or a rock from the ground, right? And then if the mother does not indicate that the child is sometimes too sick to play, right? So if the child meets all these 2 conditions, then they are said to be developmentally on track in the physical domain. And then in the social domain, we asked if 2 of the following are true for the child. If the child gets along well with other children, if the child does not kick, bite, or hit other children, and if the child does not get distracted easily. So if you ask the mothers these questions, they know their children, they know that their child cannot get along with others very well of the same age, then they'll give you the answers which we are looking for. Then lastly, the other domain was on the learning domain, whereby we asked the mothers or the caretakers if the child follows simple directions on how to do something correctly, and when given something to do, is the child able to do it independently? Then if the child can do these two things, right, the child will be said to be on track in the learning domain. So we found that 70.8% of children were developmental on track in at least two of those four domains which I've mentioned. And then the children who were mostly on domain, if we are to look at our provinces, it's Bulawayo with 77.2%, Marsh West 77.6%. But overall, the development index is on the increase if we compare with the 2014 results of the mix. Right, so we also looked at attendance to ECD, early childhood development education. We know that in Zimbabwe, it's now a policy that every child, for them to go for grade 1, they should have attended what we call ECDA and ECDB. So here we're looking at those children who are 36 months to 59 months, 3 to 5 years, whether they are attending ECD. So nationally, 28% of children, they were attending ECD, and then it was highest in Harare at 45.9%, and the lowest in Marsh Central at 19.4%. It's a policy in government that every child is supposed to attend ECD before they go for grade 1. Right, then looking at some attendance ratios in school. So we have already seen that for ECD attendance, net attendance ratio, it was at 28%. This is the last slide which I was talking about. And then, but now if you look at attendance to ECD, 1 year younger the primary school entry age. We are saying in Zimbabwe, the official primary school starting age is 6 years. But if you look at those who are 5 years, right, whom we are saying next year they will be attending grade 1. If you look at their attendance only, that group only to ECD, you find that it's quite high. It's at 81%. Meaning to say, parents or guardians opt to send their children to ECD when they are 5 years, because it's a requirement. This is the finding which we can derive from these results here. But if you look at the whole age group of 3 to 5 years, it goes down because we will be having a huge denominator. But to look at those who are 5 years, 1 year prior to start of primary, the indicator is high because parents opt to send their children to ECD just before they start grade 1. And then primary school net attendance ratio, it was at 91%. So here we're looking at the age group 6 to 12 years, which is the official primary school age. Out of that population, how many of them were in primary? So the same would apply for lower secondary. Out of the secondary school age population, how many of them were actually in secondary? And then the same for upper secondary, which was at 9%. We also looked at parental involvement of children, of parents, their involvement in learning activities at home. So we are simply looking at their involvement in activities at school, such as participating in school meetings, attending school meetings, and volunteering in schools. So we are saying this can benefit a child's performance. There are some studies done which shows that if parents attend to school activities, be they sporting events, be they meetings called by the SDCs, be they just volunteering to contribute something, for the school, there is a positive benefit on the child's performance in class. So there are some studies done in that area. So we asked the parents and guardians whether they have ever attended any of those activities in the last 12 months. So we find that by merely receiving a report card, a school report for the child, you'd find that it brings you closer to the school and closer to the child. So we found that 77% of adults said they've received a report for the child in the last year. So we were asking for 2018, because our survey was in 2019. We were asking whether they've ever received a report card or a school report which shows progress for the child in 2018. So 77% of children said that, of the parents said they've received a report for the child, meaning to say 13% of the children were not issued with report cards in their schools. And then, so there's those differentials at provincial level, which I won't go through. And then we also asked about attending a meeting called by the school governing body. 68% of the parents attended a meeting which was called by the school governing body. And then we asked for those who attended any school meeting, whether they attended a meeting which addressed key education and financial issues. We find that almost all those who attended a particular meeting, in that meeting, the meeting discussed the key financial issues regarding the school. And then parental participation in school activities like celebration or of any school event, or maybe a sporting event. We find that 50% of the children had their parents attending a sporting event or any other celebration at school. And then looking at parents or adults who met with teachers to discuss the child's progress, about 70% of the children and their parents are going to school to discuss with the teachers regarding the child's performance in class. Right, so we also looked at children 7 to 14 years, their learning environment at home, because these are the children who are in primary and in secondary. If you look at our age group, it's 7 to 14 years. We're looking at the learning environment pertaining to them at their home where they stay. So here we're looking at presence of their books at home, whether they are read to, the books are by any adults. And then we are also looking at of those, that age group, the percentage that is given homework to do at home. And then we are also looking at the language to say if the language used at home coincides with the language of instruction in class. And then the percentage of children who are assisted with homework at home. Right, so you find that nationally, 16% of children 7 to 14 years had 3 or more books to read at home. These are books to read, books meant for the child, not just magazines, soccer magazines, which we buy from the street, and then we put them in our homes. We didn't consider those ones. We are considering books meant for the child. And then we also talk about the children who have got homework. Nowadays, parents, they are complaining about children having so much homework. 90% of them said that they receive homework from school. And then of those children who receive homework at school, 89% of them receive help with that homework, either from parents or from other siblings. Right. So for the first time in Mix, we had a module which was testing the children's ability to read and understand, and then also their ability to perform simple numerical skills. So on this one, we had it's the first time that is happening in Zimbabwe, and like I said, we were testing those skills, reading and numeracy skills. So we are looking at children who are 7 to 14 years. So the reading assessment for children is based on a short story, right? We would ask the children to read a short story in the presence of Zimstat enumerator. And then after that, we would ask questions on comprehension, 2 of them being inferential questions and 3 of them being literal questions. And then in the numeracy skills assessment, we used four tasks to determine the child's ability to perform some numerous task, which is number reading, 1, 2, 3, 4, number discrimination by pointing a number written on a paper. If they're able to say this is 8, this is 10, this is 9, that's number discrimination. And then addition, that's symbol addition. And then pattern recognition, 2, 4, 6. Then maybe you can jump 8, you go to 10. Then we ask them to fill in the gap between 6 and 10. So these are the tasks which we used to assess the learning abilities of children. So for this module here, we actually worked very much with the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education to come up with the paragraph to read, to come up with the math to give to the children, and it was tested thoroughly before it was taken to the field. And we also received a lot of backup from Unicef regional and international consultants on this one. So this one is an SDG indicator, which we also need to report on as a country. And the indicator will only focus on children who are in grades 2 to 3, if they are on their foundational learning skills. Right. So if you look at our report, which we'll give you at the end of this meeting, you'd find that if you go into this section, and even in the questionnaire, you find that the reading tests, they were done in three parts. There was English, Shona, and Ndebele. At least we used those 3 languages in Zimbabwe, regardless of the fact that we've got 16 languages in the countries. But due to resources and time, we only managed to administer the reading in 3 languages. So what I'm presenting here are the skills demonstrated in reading in any of these 3 languages. But if you go into our report, you'll find that we've broken it down to say reading in English, in Shona, and in Ndebele. But for this presentation, I'm only showing the overall for any of those 3 languages. Right, so you'd find that there was a story with words, and then we are saying percent of children who correctly read 90% of the words in a story. It was 65% for girls and 56% for boys. So you'd find that most of our indicators on education, they are favoring girls, meaning to say that girls are now a step ahead of boys in almost all areas, in all disciplines of education, at least by mixed standards. So percentage of children who correctly answered 3 literal questions, nationally it was 51%, and then it was also higher among girls than it was for boys. And then percentage who correctly answered 2 inferential questions, it was also higher among girls than it was for boys. So our indicator is foundational reading skills. It was at 44% overall. 44% of children demonstrated foundational reading skills. And then numeracy skills, here we are looking at children who demonstrated numerous skills in those 4 domains which I mentioned: number reading, number discrimination, and addition. You'd find that 25% of children demonstrated foundational numeracy skills. And then if you look at the slide there, you'd find that pupils are lacking in the area of pattern recognition, which is a little bit complex than other areas that we were testing. Now looking at literacy in the country. So our literacy was assessed for women and men 15 to 49 years of age only. So nationally, it was highest among females at 92%, and then 89.4% among males. You'd find that for those who had primary education or no education, those are the people that we asked to read a simple statement, right? Like to say, the boy is running. We asked them to read, and then among those, we found those who were able to read and those who were not able to read, being literate or illiterate. And then for those with primary, we also asked them to read. And surprisingly, there are persons with primary education who have gone up to grade 7 who were not able to read a very simple statement in the language of their choice. Because we had languages for them to choose to say, I want to read in English, Shona and Tebele, things like that. So we had some who were not able to read, even though they'd gone up to primary, grade 7. And then for those who are secondary level or higher, those ones, they were deemed to be literate. Why? Because of their level which they've attended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maliwa, for the presentation. I now call upon Mr. Takra to give us a presentation on violence and exploitation. Ms. Matanga. Yeah, protected from violence and exploitation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Right, I'm going to take you through presentation on protected from violence and exploitation. The aspects which I'm going to cover here include birth registration for children under 5, child discipline, children between 1 and 14 years, child labor for children 5 to 17 years, child marriage for those who married before age 18 and those who married before age 15. I will also talk about victimization, where we are looking at crime and discrimination. And then lastly, I will talk about feelings of safety within your environment. Right, in terms of birth registration, our key indicators, we are saying at national level, 49% of children under 5 had their birth registered. And of these, 45% were registered and they had birth certificates, while 4% were registered but had no birth certificates. The pattern was the same for either sex, male or female. Then we also looked at registration by age of the child. We are saying registration of children increases with increase in their age in months, starting from 30% for those who are between 0 to 11 months, to 61% for those who are 48 to 59 months. Then by province, we are saying Blue Whale had the highest proportion of children under 5 who are registered at 71%, closely followed by Harare at 70%, and Marsh West at the lowest proportion at around 39%. Then we also looked at knowledge on those caregivers or mothers whose children were not registered by their background characteristics. So we are saying in total, the highest proportion of mothers whose children were not registered had knowledge of how to register their children, even though they had not registered them. And it's the same by all background characteristics, be it by education, be it by wealth of the household, be it by area of stay, whether in rural or urban. We are saying the highest proportion were knowledgeable of how to register their children. Then child discipline. We are saying as parents or as caregivers, we use different forms of disciplining our children, ranging from non-violent to violent to physical punishment, which at times can be severe, to psychological aggression. Then in terms of our key findings, we are saying for those children 1 to 14 years who experienced non-violent and psychological aggression by province, at national level, we had around 55% children who experienced psychological aggression. It was during the month prior to the interview date. And also around 22% experienced only non-violent disciplinary method. And by province, psychological aggression was highest in Masvingo at 63%, and the lowest in Mati North at around 41%. While for non-violent disciplinary methods, it was highest in Mati North at around 29%, and the lowest in Masvingo at 19%. Then for those children 1 to 14 years who experience physical punishment, we are saying our physical punishment, we categorized it into two. There is what we call severe, where you use things like hard objects to discipline your child. And this might have an effect of injuring your child, your children having fractures, having bruises on their bodies, and then any other physical punishment, where we are saying it's just like you can slap your child at the back using your hand. That's the ordinary physical punishment. So in terms of severe physical punishment, we are saying at national level, 6% of children 1 to 14 years experienced severe physical punishment prior to the survey. Then for another physical punishment, we are saying around 41% of children 1 to 14 years experienced any physical punishment. Then in terms of provincial disaggregation, Mashonaland Central had the highest, had a larger proportion of children who experienced severe physical punishment at around 11%, and the lowest was in Midlands at around 3.3%. Then for any ordinary physical punishment, Harare had the highest at around 54%, and the lowest was in Mati North at around 26%. Then the experience of any discipline in the past month by background characteristics, we are saying there were more children in urban areas at 60% who experienced any discipline than in rural areas at 63%. And in terms of wealth of the household, more children in wealth in richest households at 69% than in the poorest household at 61% experienced any form of discipline. Then in terms of mothers' education, we are saying for mothers who had reached the secondary level, they had the highest proportion of children who experienced any disciplinary method, and those who had pre-primary or none, the lowest at 61%. Then in terms of sex of the child, male children had the highest proportion of those who experienced any disciplinary method in the past month at 65%, and their female counterparts at 63%. Then mothers who think, perception of mothers or caregivers who think that it's necessary to administer physical punishment in order to educate children by their background characteristics. So we are saying what we got across all background characteristics, it was almost the same, whether in poor households, whether in rich households, by level of education, whether have a higher level of education or none. By age, it was the percent or the proportion was almost the same. But maybe for sex, that's where there is a notable disparity, where we are saying male caretakers had a lower proportion of those who believe it's necessary to administer physical punishment at 36% than their female caretakers or mothers at 44%. Child labor. We are saying child labor in terms of ILO Convention on the Elimination of Worst Forms of child labor. It's one of the forms of work that should be abolished. And they shall realize that this is the first time MIX has measured child labor. We used to measure our child labor using the labor force and child labor survey. So you shall see that indicators which are coming here might not be consistent to those we are used to when we use our labor force. Why? It's because of the methodology. So MIX defined child labor using age-specific threshold of hours, both economic and non-economic. For economic, we are saying for age 5 to 11, if a person worked 1 hour or more, that person would then be referred to have been engaged in child labor. For age 12 to 14, if a person works 14 or more hours, then that person will be referred to have been engaged in child labor. Then for age 15 to 17, if that person works 43 hours or more, this is per week. It's not per day, it's per week. Then that person will then be defined as having been engaged in child labor. Then for non-economic child labor, we use the following threshold of hours. 5 to 11, it was 21 hours or more. Then 12 to 14, it was again 21 hours or more. Then 15 to 17, there was no limit, implying to say there was no non-economic child labor within that age group. In terms of our key findings, we are saying overall, or in total, 28% of our children 5 to 17 years were engaged in child labor. The rate of engagement for boys at 33% was higher than for girls at 22%. And the rate of engagement in child labor decreases with the increasing age. For 5 to 11 years, it was 36%, 12 to 14 years, 25%, 15 to 17 years, it was 4%. By urban rural, the rate of engagement was highest in rural areas at 35%, compared to urban areas at 8%. By attending, not attending school, it was more prevalent for those who are attending school at 28% than those who are not going to school at 25%. In terms of wealth of the household, it was highest from poorest households at 40% than richest households at 7%. Right? Engagement in child labor by type of activity and age. We are saying for the age group 5 to 17, the highest proportion of them, around 26%, were engaged in economic activities. Then for the 5 to 11 years, the highest proportion again for this age group was for those engaged in economic activities, followed by the hazardous working conditions. Then for the age group 12 to 14, it was almost 50-50, those who are in economic activities and those who were working under hazardous working conditions. Then for the 15 to 17, highest 25% were those who were working under hazardous working conditions. Child labor by province, it was more prevalent in Masvingo at 41%, and the lowest in Bulawayo and Harare at 8%. Child marriage. We are saying child marriage has been identified as a harmful practice if we go by our SDGs. And it is said to be supposed to be eliminated by 2030, in line with our SDGs. So in terms of our survey, we sought to find those who married before age 18 and those who married before age 15. Right. Women aged 20 to 24 years who were first married or in union before age 15 and before age 18. So we are saying 33% of women who were 20 to 24 years by the time we did our survey had married before age 18, while 5% of the same age cohort had married before age 15. Women aged 20 to 49 years who were married or in union by area, education, and the wealth of the household. In total, we are saying 33% of women 20 to 49, I think we have talked about that one. By urban, rural, it was highest in rural areas at 40% than in urban areas at 21%. By level of education, we are saying the proportion of women who married before age 18 decreases with increasing level of education, where we have pre-primary or none at 66%, and then higher levels of education at 5%. Then in terms of wealth of the household, we are saying the proportion decreases with increasing wealth of the household, where the poorest households in the poorest quintile had 50% of children 20 to 49 who had married before age 18. And the richest household in the richest quintiles had 14% of the same age cohort who had married before age 18. By province, it was highest in my central at 50% and the lowest in Bulawayo at 14%. Then we come to victimization. On victimization, we looked at aspects like robbery, aspects of assault, and then we also used discrimination as a measure of victimization. So our first graph is showing women aged 15 to 49 years who were victims of robbery by a number of times it had happened in the area. So for those who had experienced victimization in the last 3 years, 5% of them, which is the highest, was in urban areas compared to 4.1% in the rural areas. And then for those who had experienced it in the last year, 3.2%, which is the highest, was in the urban areas again, and 2.9% for rural areas. Here we are looking at women. Then for those who had experienced it multiple times in the last year, we are saying 1.1, which is the highest, was in the rural areas compared to 0.7 in the urban areas. Then for men who were victims of robbery, by a number of times it happened in the area. For those who experienced it in the last 3 years, the highest was in urban areas at around 13%, and then in the rural areas it was around 8%. For those who experienced it in the last year, highest was again in the urban areas at 7%, and for those who experienced it multiple times, again it was in the urban areas. Discrimination by or harassed based on their gender, by sex and area. By urban rural, women were felt discriminated more than men in both urban and rural areas, at 6% in urban areas and 8% in the rural areas. Feeling of safety. Perception of feeling of safety impacts on someone's freedom of movement and association. So we established, in mix, we sought information on how people felt, whether they are safe in their environments. This one is showing adults, this is 15 to 49, who feel safe walking alone in their neighborhood after dark, by sex and area. So we are saying for both urban and rural, more men or more males feel safe walking alone than their female counterparts, at 88% for rural areas and 74% for urban areas. Then adults who feel safe being home, alone by dark, by sex and area, it was almost universal for men, at 95%. 95% of them, they feel safe at home alone, against women who had 78% in urban areas and 74% in rural areas. Right, I think the first part I am done. Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Matangira. May I? Okay, we should clap hands while Ms. Matangira is done with the second presentation. So I call upon Ms. Matangira to continue with the second presentation, then we clap hands afterwards for him.
Are you feeling jealous, Mr. Chair? Anyway, I am proceeding with another presentation. Use of clean fuels and technologies for cooking, space heating, and lighting. Our first finding, we are saying percentage of household members living in households using clean fuels and technologies for cooking, space heating, and lighting by their background characteristics. We are saying they were more in the urban areas at 78% than in the rural areas at 5%. By province, they were more in Harare at 82% and lowest in Mart North at 7%. By wealth quintiles, they were more for households in the highest wealth quintile at 92%. Then by education of household heads, they were more in those in household headed by persons with a higher level of education at 68% than those with lower pre-primary or none at 5%. Then I move on to water and sanitation. Percent population using basic drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene services by province. For basic water, drinking water, our highest proportion was in Blue Whale at 98%, followed and lowest in Mat North and Mat South at 51%. Then for basic sanitation, highest proportion again was in Blue Whale and the lowest in Mat North at 24%. Then for basic hygiene, highest proportion was in Blue Whale at 82% and the lowest in Mashonaland West at 51%. Then percent population using drinking water services by background characteristics. We are saying there were more in urban areas at 92% than in rural areas at 51%. And by province, we had more in Blue Whale at 98% and the lowest in Mat North at 51%. In terms of wealth of the household, the proportion was highest in richest households at 94% and the lowest in poorest households at 32%. In terms of education of head of household, it was higher for household head with a higher level of education at 89% and the lowest for those with primary at 50%. Percent population using safely managed drinking water services by background characteristics. Again, it's higher in urban areas at 27% and lower in rural areas 3%. Then by province, it was again higher for Blue Whale, 28%, and the lowest in Mat South at 3%. By wealth of the household, higher for the richest households at 33%, and the lowest in the poorest households at 1%. Then by education of the head, it was higher for, the proportion was higher for those with a higher level of education at 23%, and the lowest for those with pre-primary or none at 2%. Population using basic sanitation services by background characteristics, higher in urban areas at 43% than in rural areas at 34%. It was higher in Blue Whale at 56%, lowest in Mat North at 24%. It was highest for richest households at 55%, and the lowest for those in the poorest, Quinda, at 9%. It was also by education head of household. It was higher for those with a higher level of education at 58% than for those, and the lowest in those with pre-primary or none at 25%. Open defecation by background characteristics. Open defecation was highest in rural areas at 31%. Then in urban areas, it was around 1%. By province, highest in Mat North at 60%, and in Harare, lowest at 0%. Then in terms of wealth of the household, it was highest for poorest households at 65%, and then the richest households, it was 0%. Then in terms of level of education of head, it was highest for those with none who haven't achieved any level of education at 42%, and then those with higher were lowest at 3%. Then basic hygiene. Population using basic hygiene services by background characteristics. It was highest in urban areas at 73% than in rural areas at 60%. Then by province, It was highest in Bluewayo at 82%, the lowest in Marsh West at 51%. Then in terms of wealth of the household, it was highest in richest households at 78% and lowest in poorest households at 47%. Then by level of education, it was highest for household heads with a high level of education at 82% than those with pre-primary or none at 47%. Menstrual hygiene management. Women with a private place to wash and change at home. We are saying 97% of women indicated that they had a private place to wash and change at home. Then women with appropriate materials to use during their menstrual cycles, 98% of the women said they had appropriate material to use. Then women with appropriate material and a private place to wash and change at home. 95% of women indicated that they had appropriate material to use and they also had a private place to wash and change at home. I am now done.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matangira. I think we can clap hands once more for him before we rest. Okay, I now call upon Mr. Chikea to give us another presentation on equitable chance in life. Mr. Chikea, over to you. Thank you.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back again with a presentation on equitable chance in life. This presentation is going to touch on child functioning. It's also going to talk about the health insurance coverage and also life satisfaction. Right. On child functioning, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, it outlines that state parties' obligation to ensure a full realization of rights of children with disabilities on an equal basis with other children. So the presence of functional difficulties may place children at the risk of experiencing limited participation in an accommodating environment and limit the fulfillment of their rights. So what we did in the Mix 2019, we included child functioning module, which intended to provide an estimate of the number or a proportion of children with functional difficulties as reported by their mothers or primary caregivers. So what we had functional domains that we covered for different children, for those who were 2 to 4 years and others were for 5 to 17 years old. So these are the functional domains that we looked at. We looked at seeing, we looked at hearing, we looked at walking, we looked at fine motor, communication, learning, playing, controlling behavior, self-care, remembering, concentrating, accepting change, making friends, anxiety, and depression. So those are the domains. When you hear me mentioning about the domains, at least one domain, I'm talking about these domains. Right, so when we looked at the results, they are giving us that 3.8% of children aged 2 to 4 years had a functional difficulty in at least one domain. And children aged 5 to 17 years, about 10% of them had a functional difficulty in at least one domain. So combined together for children who are aged 2 to 17 years old, 8.9% of them have at least had a functional difficulty in at least one domain. Then the next slide is showing functional domain, difficulties in functional domain by sex. The blue one is showing the males, and the orange one is showing the females. So for 2 to 4 years, you can see that males have got 4.6% who have at least one functional domain, who have a functional difficulty in at least one functional domain, and 3.1 for females. And the same for 5 to 17 years, males have got more percentage or proportion, which is 11.1 compared to 9.1. So it seems functional difficulties are more in male children compared to female children. Then the next slide is showing the functional domain by the mother, if the mother of the child also have a functional difficulty. So here we are saying that 6.8% of children with mothers who have a functional difficulties at least one, functional difficulties in at least one domain. So it shows that if the mother of the child has a functional difficulty, then it's most likely that also the child has functional difficulties compared to the mothers who does not have functional difficulties. Then functional difficulty with wealth quintiles is showing that in children with functional difficulties in at least one domain are more prevalent in poorest household compared to richest household. As you can see, for those 2 to 4 years, that is 5.8 for poorest, 1.7 for richest, 13.1 for poorest, 6.6 for children 5 to 17, and then 11.7% in poorest households, and 5.6% in richest households for children aged 2 to 17. Then I'm now going to talk about health insurance coverage. We also asked questions on health insurance, what we usually call medical aid here in Zimbabwe. So from the survey, we found out that 9.5% of women are covered by medical insurance, or they have a medical aid, of which 84% is through their employer. And then I think the second highest was from private owned medical aids. And then 8.4% of men are covered by medical insurance, of which 79% of those is through their employer. And then for children, 5.6% for children aged 5 to 17 years are covered by the medical aid, and 84% is through the employer of their caregiver or the parent. Then 6% of children under 5 are covered by medical insurance, and 87% is through the employer of the parent or the caregiver. As you can see, this is a comparison. The next slide, it shows a comparison of health insurance by urban and rural. There is a large distinction which is showing that medical insurance or medical aid, mostly people in the urban areas are the ones that are covered by medical insurance. As you can see, for women, 17.2 in urban areas compared to 4.7 in rural areas. For men, it's 16.7 in urban compared to 3.7 in rural areas. Then for children that are 5 to 17, 16% in urban areas and 1.9 in rural areas. And for those under 5, it's about 14%, which is 13.9, and 3 in urban areas. So you can see across all these ages, rural areas, there are fewer people who have medical aid compared to urban areas. Then we also collected information on external support. That is support that was given to households, either from NGOs, other organizations, the government, and etc. So what we can see from here is we are saying about 49% of the population got at least, who had received at least external support. And then it is prevalent in rural areas, whereby we are saying 66% received external support compared to 17% in urban areas. Then by province, you can see that the two provinces, Bulawayo and Harare, which are predominantly urban, received 14% in Harare and 24% has received external support, while most of the predominant rural area provinces have got higher rates, of which the highest is Mashonaland and Central with 66%. The next slide is showing external economic support by households with orphans and with quintiles. So we are saying that 63.3% of the households received external supports when the 66.3% of households with at least one orphan received external support, compared to 46% of households with no orphans. Then comparing by wealth index, we see that external support was mostly channeled to the poorest households, which is about 69.5%, which is, let's say, just 70% of the poorest households at least got an external support. And from the richest households, about 20% got external economic support. Then the next slide is showing percentage of household members living in households receiving specific types of support in the last 3 months. So we did ask about the support that was being given to the communities. We had cash transfers such as HSCT, or that money that usually provided to poor households or those with elderly, disabled, or people or orphans. And then we also had assistance for food such as drought relief, communal gardens, or agricultural inputs. We have got another support which is for vouchers for health services such as AMTO and the maternal vouchers. We have got another support that we asked, that is retirement and any other external support. And also we have another support that we talked about school tuition or school-related support. So from all these support categories, we can see that the highest was assistance for food, such as drought relief, communal gardens, or agricultural inputs, which have got 31.9%. And then we also asked a question on life satisfaction, how happy we are with the life that we are living at the moment. So we actually gave people that ladder that you can see, which is measuring the life that someone is perceiving to live if you are saying you are at 0, you are saying we are living the worst possible life in 2019. And then if you are at 10, you are living the best possible life. So this is the scale that we used when we were asking the respondents. So these are their perceptions of the life that they are living right now. So for women that are aged 15 to 49, I think they were on average, they were saying we are at 5. And then for men, it was about 4.9. So all of them, they are just saying, maybe our life is just average. We are not living the best possible life or the worst possible life. And then when looking at the poorest and the richest households, both for women and men, it's almost the same. As you can see, the poorest for women has got 4.9, and the richest 5.7. The poorest for men is 4.5, and the richest is 5.4. So there's actually no one who's saying I'm living the best possible life, and someone who's saying I'm living the worst possible life. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. HK. I call upon Ms. Madiwa to give us the last presentation before we go into general discussions and question session. Ms. Madiwa.
Thank you, Chair. In mix, we adopted the ZDHS module, which measures domestic violence. And it's the first time that we've included this module in our mix survey. So basically, we are looking at violence perpetrated to women, which we call intimate partner violence. So violence from both a spousal or intimate partner, and violence perpetrated by other family members or unrelated individuals. So basically we were looking at women 15 to 49 years who have ever experienced interpersonal violence, and our main thrust was on intimate partner violence. And then we also looked at other forms of violence, right? Spousal violence, spousal emotional violence, physical violence, and sexual violence at any time in the last 12 months to see if they've ever experienced that in the last 12 months. So in my presentation, I'm simply going to give you some key highlights of the incidences of violence in the last 12 months and ever in their lifetime. Right. So on the next slide, you'll see that, I don't know if that one is clear, but the first block there is talking of the province, whereby we're talking of experiences of physical violence. And we're looking at adolescent girls and women in the age group 15 to 49 years who have experienced physical violence since age 15. You'd find that since age 15, the highest was in March Central, whereby 45.5% of women in that age group have ever experienced some form of physical violence. And it was lowest in March North at 30.5%. And then if you have to look at the prevalence of that violence, with age, you'd find that as age increases, the experience of violence also increases. And then if you have to look at the marital status of the women, you'd find that those women who have never married or never been in union were least likely to experience some form of physical violence, but those who were divorced, separated, or widowed are those ones who were at high risk of having experienced some form of physical violence. Right, looking at sexual violence, still we're looking at those women 15 to 49 years who have ever experienced some form of sexual violence. So we had several forms of sexual violence which we we investigated in our survey, and I'm sure I'll come to a slide where I'll explain a bit on them. So nationally, 11.6% of women at one point in their life experienced some form of sexual violence, be it from their partner or from any other persons in their life. And then if you look at the distribution of that experience by age group, you find that as age increases also, the experience of sexual violence would also increase. And also the same pattern is observed for the marital status of those women. Those who are divorced, separated, or widowed are those who experienced, who were at high risk of having experienced sexual violence compared to those who are never married or who are currently in union during our survey. Right, so looking at the different forms of spousal violence, so I just picked on physical and sexual violence, but there are finer details in our reports. Like I've said before, ever experience of sexual violence or physical violence was at 37% across the country. That is for all those women 15 to 49 that we interviewed. And then if we were to look at the various types of violence that the women suffered, pushing, shocking, shaking, or throwing something at her, it was at 14.9%. And kicking, dragging, or beating was at 12.7%. And then punching with fists or with something that could hurt the woman was at 13.5%. And then if you were to look at sexual violence, like I've said before, it was at 9%, at about 10% for all women who had experienced that one ever in their lifetime. And then the various forms of that violence, those who were physically forced to have sexual intercourse with the men or with the spouse when the woman did not want to, it was at 8.9%. This is ever in their lifetime. And then for those who experienced it in the last 12 months, it was at 5.3%. And then physically forcing the woman to perform any other sexual acts that they did not want to, ever in the lifetime, it was at 2.8% and 1.8% in the last 12 months. And then forcing a woman with threats or in a way so that they perform sexual acts when they did not want to, it was at 2.5% for the ever experience. And then in the last 12 months, it was at 1.3% preference rate. Right. So we also asked questions on violence by women perpetrated on their husbands or on their spouses. So we were asking the women themselves to say, have you ever done this to your male partner, and not the other way around, to ask the husband whether they have experienced that form of violence. Because this module was administered only to women, so we wanted to know if the women also are also perpetrating violence against men. So here we're looking at the percentage of ever married women who have committed physical violence against their current or most recent husband when he was not already beating or physically hitting her. So we excluded those scenarios whereby the man is already punching at the woman. At the woman, when the man is already hitting the woman, then the woman would retaliate. So we asked when the man was not already beating or physically hitting the female counterpart. So you'd find that nationally, 2.9% of the women said they've at one point in their life committed physical violence against their spouses, their male spouses. And it was highest in Marsh East. 5.1% of the women said they've beaten their men at one time. And then it was lowest in Mashingo at in March South at 0.8%. And then if you were to look at the marital status of those women, you'd find that when you are divorced, you are likely to have beaten your men at some time during the subsist of your marriage. Right. So basically, these are the results that we have on domestic violence, but there is more in our report. So, Chairperson, allow me to go on and do a comparison of the 2019 mix with the previous rounds of mix and DHS, just quickly.
Okay, you can go ahead, Ms. Wadu.
Thank you. Right, so you'd find that we have done the mix in 2014, and also in 2015 we did a DHS. So these two surveys are comparable. So we want to see if, as a country, we have improved or we did not, or if we've actually gone for the worse. So you'd find that, maybe before I go into this one, before I forget, for those of you who have been interviewed by Zimstad before, or we have had a chance to see our questionnaires, you'd find that the questions that we ask in our surveys, they normally respond to the what question and not the why. So they would give you what the situation is like in the country, but not to say why is it like that. So the questions which we, the indicators which we have, they are on the what side. And to some extent, they also answer the who, to say who is affected, who is behaving like this, but not the why question. We don't go that far in most of the cases. So you find there are some increases and decreases. So in our survey, we don't go further to ask why was there a decrease, but it is for the policymakers in this house to tell us what's happening on the ground, to say why is maternal mortality decreased, why is it increased, why is it stayed stagnant, things like that. So I'll just rush through the next few slides to see if, as a country, we've improved or not. In terms of improved drinking water sources, we've gone up. So you'd find that we have done some tests already on these indicators. So if you go to the appendix of our report, there's a DQ table which gives you the confidence intervals of these indicators. So I'm sure if you are aware of them having overlapped, not, then it means that there's no increase or decrease. So you find that for use of improved drinking water sources, there's an increase from 2014. Improved sanitation, there's also an increase. Open defecation, it has decreased, which is a good thing. It was 31.7% in 2014. Now it has gone down to 21.7% in 2019. But I'm not sure of whether it has actually decreased in Mat North, where it is always highest. Maybe we can check that in our report. And then safe disposal of child stools, it has improved. Use of soap or cleaning agents for hand washing, it has improved. And then households with no facility, they've actually decreased. Households with no toilet facility, they've also decreased. And then in terms of education, you find that we've got some ups and downs. As attendance to ECD, there's an increase. 1 year prior starting grade 1, there's an increase. And then net intake rates in primary, there is a decrease. Primary school net attendance ratio, there is also a decrease. So I won't go through everything. I'll just pick on those that I think they are topical. And then transition rate to secondary school, there's also a decrease. So in the area of education, I'm sure it has to do with the timing of our survey, whereby at one time we interviewed our respondents during the school holiday. So there might be a small effect to that one. And then child protection, birth registration, it has improved. Physical aggression against children, it has gone up. We are disciplining more this time around. Married before age 18, women, it has gone down a bit. Children 0 to 17 years with at least one biological parent living abroad, it has gone up from 10.6 to 12.5 percent. I mean to say at least one parent of the children is living abroad. Right, then this one, I won't go through it on child mortality because Mr. Chike has already covered it in his presentation. Then nutrition, there's improvement, save for moderate and severe underweight in children, which has gone up. And then also exclusive breastfeeding for children under 6 months, it has gone down from 47% to 42%. And then child health, these are the coverages of immunizations. They've all gone up, as you can see there. So it means the ministry is doing a very commendable job. And then children with malaria, with fever in the last 2 weeks, we see that it was on the increase from 14% to 21% between 2015 and 2019. And then total fertility rates, there's a slight decrease from 4 to 3.9%. And then ANC coverage, there's no change there, but it remained high at 93%. And then institutional deliveries, they also improved from 77% to 85%. And then lastly, this one has been talked about already, the maternal mortality ratio, which has improved from 651 to 462. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Madiwa, for the presentation. I think at this juncture, I'm calling upon all the presenters to join me to the high table for questions. We've got 30 minutes for general discussions and questioning. So may all the presenters come to the high table. So before you ask questions, can we just clap hands for the presenters who have worked hard throughout the day? Okay, thank you. It's now open for discussion. Any comments, concerns, or questions? Say.
Hello, my question goes to Mr. Madiwa. What is the impact of poverty in fueling domestic violence?
Okay, your question is noted down. Can we have at least 3 questions, then we respond?
Very low, people not failing to read even just one sentence. Are we sure that we are certain that they could see? Their vision was okay?
Okay, thank you. My question is under WASH open defecation. I have noted that Harare is 0%. And I'm wondering, is it true? What criteria was being used? If you move around the streets of Harare, you'd agree with me. We see a lot of feces, but we are saying Harare is 0%. Thank you.
we respond? Start with Ms. Madiwa.
Thank you very much, President. The question is on. What is the impact of poverty in fueling domestic violence? What is the effect of poverty in fueling domestic violence? You find that, in general, I would simply say this question would need further analysis. But if we were able to do the analysis in our report of the household wealth, right, you'd find that those women who were from households that are poor were more likely to have experienced some form of violence compared to those that were from richest households. So to actually give, to quantify the impacts of this state, they are not possible, but I can ensure if you are to do some further analysis of the data, you can see, the impact of it. Say if you are poor, you are likely to be exposed to violence. You can see that. My colleague answer the question.
Okay, there was a question to say why Harare is 0% information. When we do our surveys, we go to households. We ask households to say what type of toilet facility do you use. Then as a household, they respond to us to say if they don't have a toilet, they will get, they use the pool. That's where our response to say open defecation comes from. Then when we are talking of whatever you see in the street, it could be people who are, people if they are outside their house. Some people get drunk, some people they do a lot of things, some sleep in the streets. But for us, we ask at the household level. We don't then go to the streets to say who was doing this along the street. Yeah.
So basically, we're saying at the household level, we ask the facility that members of the household mainly use for defecation. And then, if one of the members is used the street at one time, that's not the main one. The main one is that which members of the household normally mainly use. And then there was a question on children reading. The question was, are we sure that for those who said they failed to read, are we sure that they surely not able to read, or they failed to see, because they couldn't read because of the poor eyesight? Am I correct? Okay. So in our survey, all those children who had some form of capacitation were not asked to read. If they had some visual impairments and they can't read, they need to braille. We didn't have braille in our survey, so automatically they were not asked to read. But if there's some other form of incapacitation, maybe difficulty moving, difficulty hearing, but they are able to read, they are able to see, they were asked to read this short paragraph.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Madiwa. Any more questions?
Thank you. The question concerns a comment that was passed on literacy, which says there was a group that would complete primary without being able to read. But again, the assumption was that anyone who completed secondary was literate, which then poses a question to say, if someone completes primary without being able to read, and the law in the country says there is automatic progression to secondary school. What then changes when a learner leaves grade 7 without being able to read, and they complete Form 4, and then you assume that after completing 4 years, they can now read?
Thank you. My question pertains to the inclusion of, here. Thank you. Inclusion of adolescent girls or youth in these surveys. A shocking statistic is around menstrual health management. If we are saying 98 or 97% of women are able to use appropriate materials, how much true is this for adolescent girls who in most instances do not have the capacity, financial capacity to be able to get these materials? And what sort of materials are we talking about?
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. My question is about the data collection period in Manicaland. So last year around this period of time, Cyclone Ida hit Manicaland and part of Mashingo province. So I'm wondering if all the data was collected prior to cyclone or after the cyclone, or some data were collected pre-cyclone and post-cyclone. I think that will affect the quality of data that we can collect in Manicaland and part of Mashingo province. So it would be great if you can comment on that. Thank you.
On the other side, mine is on the improved water sources. You said the improved water sources increased the percentage of people with access to improved water sources. I think now we should talk about the improved source, but we should talk more about the access to the water, the clean water, because you find, yes, you might have improved water sources, but how many, especially in urban areas, are getting the water directly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is a follow-up question or comment with regards to the issues of open defecation, speaking on the WASH dimension. So maybe my comment would be, because I think it also ties with what Madame has said, and I think we all know the predicaments that have fallen Harare with regards to cholera, typhoid, etc., etc. So maybe my comment or recommendation was to say, because MIX is one of the leading surveys or documents that we are saying would also assist us in terms of tracking the indicators or targets with regards to SDGs. And issues of open defecation, access to safe sanitation facilities is also paramount and key. So maybe my recommendation, I don't know how feasible is it, because we are looking at this survey as more on the quantitative side of things. But we also need an in-depth analysis that is on the qualitative side of things. Yes, as sectors, we may have our mini surveys, researches, etc., but I think at that global or national or overall level, we also need that qualitative, more like surveys or analysis, so that we can compare the data that will be coming based on this quantitative survey, because that would give us a true reflection of what's happening on the ground. Like my colleague from the WASH sector has highlighted, because for open defecation, it's directly related to the diseases that are WASH related that we're talking about, the cholera, and it's not because a household has got a latrine or a toilet that we may say there's no open defecation. But even what is happening behind Chicken Inn or in the street directly affects even the water sources in Budiriro. And obviously, the cholera that is happening in Budiriro would affect someone in Buera. So I think as a recommendation, there is need to also have an extension of this survey to make it a qualitative one, so that we can have the data that is comparable and also be able to report on the various indicators that we have at national and global level.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. I think it's taken on board. It will be considered when we have other rounds of the mix or any other survey which SIMSAS conducts, if we have some health questions, we may consider to maybe have a standalone qualitative survey to give us the why and the how part of what you're asking about. Yeah. Then, Mr. Chike, can you respond?
Okay, thank you very much. I think there was a question about adolescent girls on the menstrual, on menstruation. I think they are part of the statistics that we produced because this survey was asking the women aged 15 to 49 years. So maybe if you want a separate period, a separate age group, which is 15 to 49, that 15 to 19 or 15 to 24, any other age group that you want, I think that statistics can be generated for you so that you can see.
Thank you. There was also a question on improved water sources, and then the issue was that can we move away from talking of access and start talking about, can we move away from talking about having access to improved, but maybe let's talk about, is the water there? Are we able to access the water? Yes, if you are to go into the main findings of the report, you'd find that we actually asked on the type of the water source itself, right? And then we went further to ask about whether the householders had problems in accessing water from their main source of water for drinking, and whether the water is accessible as we speak, as we do the interview. So we tried to find finer details regarding those sources of water for drinking. We didn't just end on ascertaining if it is improved or not improved, but we went further to interrogate if the water is available, whether the source has been functional continuously for the past, is it 3 months or 5 months? I don't remember the period. Whether the water is accessible perennially. So we had some final details regarding this indicator. And then a question was raised on literacy, to say, are we sure that those who attained secondary education are literate? Yes, it is an assumption which we have made to say those with secondary education or higher, they are deemed to be literate. And it's true that this assumption is not always 100% correct. Why? Because we've got people in Zimbabwe, there's automatic progression, as you have rightly pointed out. So someone can go up to Form 4, but being unable to read and write. So basically, the comment is that in Zimbabwe, we lack wholesome literacy data. If today you are to go to the UNESCO website, you won't find much of our statistics on literacy. Why? Because we've never done a fully fledged literacy survey whereby we test the full literacy definition, right? So this one is a proxy which we use to say if someone has attained secondary education or above, we assume they are literate. But this is the plus, it's better than using a proxy of someone having attained grade 3 and then we assume they are literate, which we do in other surveys. So for mixed and DHS, it's even better because they tell us more to say someone who has attained primary, we ask them to read a simple statement. And then those with secondary, we assume that they are literate. But what we need to do as a country is to conduct a fully fledged literacy survey so that if we say 95% of Zimbabweans are literate, we've got some scientific backing on that one.
Okay, then on the issue of data quality, because of the cyclone Idai, in terms of our sampling design, our estimates were required at provincial level as well as national level. So when we are selecting these EAs, they are proportionally allocated to the provinces, and we'd find out that in some of the districts we'll be having very few enumeration areas, the likes of Chimanimani districts and Masvingo province. When data collection was done, the impact was not that big in terms of data collection. We managed to collect all data in those enumeration areas during the cyclone Idai, because it was towards the end. So in terms of our data quality, it's still okay. It was not only going to be okay if we required estimates at district level, whereby we require the number of enumeration areas to be more representative of a particular district. It would then mean that we would have more enumeration areas which would have been affected for us to say at the end of the day our quality is not correct when we want to have estimates at a particular district.
To add on to what my colleague has said regarding adolescent girls in their last menstrual period, and I'm sure the question was also to say, what is it that we call appropriate? Is it a method, right? Material for use during the last menstrual cycle. So we had a whole list of several methods which they can use, which girls use during that time. Tampons, menstrual cups, cloth, some pieces of cloth, cotton, right? So they will tell us that the last time I had my menstrual period, I used a tissue paper. I didn't use anything. I used cotton wool, I used tampons, and then would classify those now, those are responses to say these ones are the appropriate methods and these ones are the inappropriate. Appropriate in the sense that they are recommended to use. So for them, being appropriate or not, it's neither here nor there, because that's what they have. If someone says I used like leaves or grass cobs, with some people telling us that, to them it's appropriate maybe, but we know that ideally they're not supposed to be using that. So it was a matter of classifying the different responses which we got from the field to say, are these the appropriate measures or they are not? Thank you. And then the issue of cyclone Idai. Mr. Mkavi, when did you do the mix? Oh, you've answered it. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thanks.
Any more questions? We are left with 18 minutes to discuss.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. My question was on disability inclusion. There was a comment on the literacy and that there was no braille for those children to participate. So in our methodology, did we have a way that we could let persons with disability participate in the survey as a whole? And then the second one is just a comment to say that the target that we were working with when we were looking at the mix, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was children and adolescents and adults within households. Is there room to expand this for children and adolescents who are also outside of the primary care, those children in residential care institutions, on the streets and so forth, so that we sort of have a picture as well of those who are outside of the home environment? Thank you.
Thank you. My question is on urban sanitation. If I get it correct, the statistics which was presented was saying urban is 43% coverage in terms of basic sanitation. And in my understanding, urban sanitation is about wastewater management as well as solid waste. But if I'm looking at the coverage of sanitation which is below 50%, then we have an open definition of national statistics at 1%. Is the 43% as an impact on solid solid waste minus wastewater. Maybe if I can be assisted in terms of the correlation, the analysis part of it, because sanitation coverage is too low. And if I look at some components that are part of the sanitation aspect, they are also low. Then I'm failing to get it there. Thank you.
Any response, Ms. Matangira?
Okay, thank you very much. I will start with the one on functional disability among children. Correct, we didn't have Braille to give to them so that they can read. So basically, it goes back to resources. We would have wanted everyone to be able to read. Braille being one of the forms of reading. Like I've said in my presentation, that we managed only to administer the module on reading in 3 languages, namely English, Shona, and Ndebele. But if we had the resources to include all the 16 languages in the country, we would have done so. And it would have taken also time to administer the questionnaires. It would require us to have more personnel who have got also these skills in understanding Braille, understanding other languages like Tonga, our sign languages, all those. But for a start, we are saying this is at least something which we can use. And if going forward, if we've got the resources, we should be able to include all the resources, and then we will be able to include all the children to read. Because if you look into our tables in the report, you'd find that we've got quite big a number of children who failed to participate in this module because there was no language of their choice. They would say, I want to read in Kalanga, which we didn't have in the survey. So the results are only showing for those children who had a language of their choice included in our survey. And then children outside the home, ours was a household-based survey. We go into the households, we establish the household first, and then we interview the persons in the household. So for children outside the home, I'm sure we are not able to capture them. Those who are living in collective households, I'm sure Mr. Kavi can still add on this one. Those who are in boarding schools, they're excluded even from the sampling stage. They are not part of the sample itself. Those children who are maybe in prisons, they are not part of the usual household which we interview in our surveys.
Right. When we define basic sanitation, we are saying this includes the hygienic separation of human excreta from human beings. So we are looking at flush toilets, pour or flush, and then into sewer system, and then maybe into septic tanks again, and then pit latrines. But your question was to say urban is having 43, and then the comparison was on what? You were comparing 43 with? Who asked the question? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. I think you started very well to say separation of waste.
Yeah, from humans, yes.
Right. If we have 43% for urban, what we are saying is only 43% of our properties in urban are doing that. The rest are not. And then what happens to their, how in terms of behavior now? That's why I earlier on asked about open defecation, because it's not about the availability of a facility. It's about behavior of a person. So if 43% are only managing their waste, then more than 50% are not. What is happening to their waste? That's the simple analysis and comparison that I'm looking at.
All right, thank you. I think it goes back to issue of definitions, what we mean by basic sanitation. Maybe I can just give you in short what we meant by basic sanitation, and then if we are not convincing on that one, maybe we can look at it further. Because here we're talking of, if we are saying that a household is using basic sanitation, we are saying it uses, it makes use of an improved facility that are not shared with other household members. You might be having a improved pit latrine at your home, right? But as long as you are sharing it with other with other households, right, with other people who are not members of a household, then it becomes unimproved. If you've got some lodgers at your place, and then you use one toilet facility, even if it's a flush to septic tank or flush to sewer system, as long as it is two or more households that are sharing that facility, it becomes unimproved. This is the definition which is used. And then, so we are saying those improved facilities, they include the flush toilets, to piped sewer system, to piped septic tanks, the VIPs, the BVIPs, things like that. So basically, I'm sure it's an issue to do with definition, how the mix defines basic sanitation, and how the country, Zimbabwe, expects in terms of its own definitions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question, and let me start to congratulate Singstars for the job well done and partners to come up with this document. Thank you for that. I have a question on the HIV module, where we have some list of indicators that we're measuring, like knowledge, those who have been tested and those who know their status. Without coupled with biomarkers, it's subject to some bias since it's the reported data that need also to be considered and further disaggregated and further analyzed. Looking also into the domestic violence, where you had also analyzed or where you asked questions, vice versa, to say maybe women as perpetrators of violence. If you look at the figures that you have reported, they are quite relatively small and subject to the bias that you can be introduced by asking a woman whether they have been perpetrators of violence. There might be social desirability bias. So we might be able to say these are the results, but they might be subject to some form of bias. We need to take into consideration. Therefore, my recommendation is, especially for there are a number of other surveys also that complement the HIV module and sexual violence. But I think for SDGs and other reporting for further commitment, we may include indicators that will also give us the broader picture of the sexual behavior, like multiple sexual partners, those who are engaging in risk sex practices, other than only ending at those with sex at the age of, before the age of 15. Thank you.
Thank you. When you compared this current mix with the previous mix and ZDHS, we said there was safe disposal of childhood stools has improved. I would be interested in finding out how this was assessed, because one wonders now with the increased use of diapers and the poor refuse collection, whether there might be merit in doing a stratification by urban and rural areas, so that we don't console ourselves that we are doing well when on looking, deep diving, we find we are not doing so well.
Thank you. My question relates to the statistics around child marriage in women and also men, those that got into marriage or unions by age 15 or age 18. found a correlation between those two groups, where if I was a man 15 or 18, what was the age of that person I was actually getting into women? Were they also a child or an older woman? And again, I would also want to know how easy it was also to get information, particularly from the men, given the illegality associated with marrying a child. Thank you.
Thank you for the. I want to make 3 recommendations based on the findings. The first one has to do with literacy. On the issue of literacy, Zimbabwe is always praised for the high level of literacy in the 90s. But we know from data that there's quite a gap in our assessment. One of which was already identified, which is the assumption that is made that children who transition to secondary school can read and write. We know that to be not true based on empirical evidence in schools. So my recommendation is that perhaps we should use the same approach that we are using at primary level so that we can actually find out what is the true status of the literacy rate at secondary school, for secondary school level children. The second recommendation is around language. We know for a fact that in the areas where we are now saying that we couldn't find enough resources to translate the tools to Kalanga or Tonga or Nambia, some of those areas are actually the areas that we know to be marginalized in education. So I think concerted effort actually shouldn't be in 2020 an argument that we are making to say that resources could not be found to translate tools so that these issues can be captured. Going forward, we must make an effort to make sure that we do not leave anyone behind. And the same recommendation goes for children with disabilities. We know for a fact that children with disabilities face greater barriers in terms of their access to education and other social services. For that reason, the assessment around their access to education and other social services must not leave them behind under the guise that we don't have the tools or we don't have people that can support us in doing that. I think as a country, we need to have that information because these groups are the most marginalized groups, and we know that for a fact. But when we do studies like this, they continue not to be visible. My recommendation is that going forward, resources must be found. They must be found so that we can address the needs of children with disabilities and those from minority language groups. And then the last issue is around the, in your report on page 36, I see that you use the 5 dimensions of exclusion in defining the out-of-school children. I think you may want to relook that because there are a little bit of disparities between the data, the percentages that you're finding versus the net, the net and attendance ratios, and the way that you're defining your out-of-school population. We might want to relook at that because the 5 dimensions of exclusion actually speak to children who are at risk of dropping out as being part of those that are out of school. But there's some missing information there, so maybe we want to further explore that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the recommendation.
Regarding the brackets used for the adolescent girls' menstrual cycle, the recommendation that perhaps we need to lower the age because 15 is a little too far from the reality of when the girl child you may want to probably take it down to about 12. And I think your data will be a bit more accurate. Secondly, I wanted to ask the relationship of data for I saw statistics in the rural areas that the girl child initiates, than the boy child, and that in the rural areas, the statistics on pregnancies in adolescents is also higher, and the data also showed that the children in rural areas, a lot of them are not moving on from, is it primary school onto secondary school? You can correct me. I wanted to understand, are we saying that because the girl child in the rural areas is initiating sex at an earlier stage, it's because she's not educated, or what are we saying? Is it related? Are you saying that the lack of education in the rural areas for the girl child is why they are initiating sex and getting pregnant at an earlier stage?
Right, I want to respond to question on marriage. Yeah, I agree. It was going to be interesting to see both men and women and see how were they relating in terms of marrying before age 18 or before age 15. But unfortunately for this round of mix, these questions were only asked to women. They were not asked to men. So for now, it might not be possible to do the comparisons.
Adding on that, what we have, I think if you check, maybe you will check later, on table PR 4.3, it talks about the spousal age differences. This is what we have for now, but we did not ask how old when you were 15 years, whom were you married to? Was he 60? Was he 60? Was he 45? So I think what we have is the spousal age difference right now. And then maybe I can also comment on the HIV module. I think in mix, most of the HIV questions were left out because they were left out for DHS, because DHS, you do a more comprehensive job because it do the biomarking and the testing of respondents. So actually in mix, there were knowledge questions only for HIV. So a more comprehensive picture on HIV will be from mix and also from the FIA project, SIMFIA, and DHS, sorry. It will be from DHS and SIMFIA.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments on education coming from, I think it's Unicef. Yeah, we really need to make sure that we leave no one behind and include all languages. Because those areas, we know that they are the ones that are marginalized. So there's need to mobilize resources. And thank you also for the question regarding why we see the rural girls being affected mostly. But again, this is a why question, which I said it would need further research to find out why things are like that among our rural girls. So it's a question which we will pose to everyone, those who are in the area of research, to start looking at as these ones as possible areas of further analysis or further study. And then there was a question on disposal of child stools, and we said that it has increased between 2014 and 2019. Yes, so with the advent of the diapers, Mapambas, we know that parents, at times a child would just pass stools and then they will throw that into the garbage bin, and then it's taken away by the council trucks which clear litter in our areas of residence. So basically, in this survey, we asked to know what happened to the last time the child passed the stools. How did they dispose of that the stool that the child passed? So, if the diaper, the child was cleaned and the stool was wrapped in a diaper, if the diaper was not put in a latrine, say it is a VIP toilet, if it was not put in a latrine, if the diaper was not rinsed or cleaned and the dirt is flushed down the drain, if the diaper was not buried or bent, then that is an unsafe way of disposing a child's stool. A diaper is only you're supposed to get rid of the stool either by rinsing it into the toilet and then you flush, or you rinse it into the drain or into a ditch, or you bury it. But if you only throw it into the garbage bin so that the city council would come and collect, that is an improper way of disposing a child's stool. So I'm sure we were very much abreast of that in our training of enumerators, to say they're supposed to ask further questions to the mothers, to say, what did you do with that diaper? How did you dispose that diaper when last time the child passed stools? So we are confident that, we are sure that what we got is a true increase from 2014 because we gave enough training to our enumerators.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Madiwa. I think at this juncture we need to close the discussion session. Okay, one more burning question, should be the last one because we are running out of time.
Apologies, I would just add one thing about menstrual hygiene management. So last year there was national formative research on menstrual hygiene management for in and out of school girls aged 10 to 24 years. And it's a nationally representative sample of 2,610 girls included, led by Ministry of Health and Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. So I think the data, or final report is almost being finalized. So I think it will be available soon. So together with mixed data, I think this national formative research will be very informative and complement with each other to guide our actions for menstrual hygiene management. Thank you.
Okay, I think let's clap hands for our presenters for the last time. And thank you for giving good comments and good questions. So at this juncture, I think we need to move forward with our program. Okay, during the mixed survey, there were survey equipment which was used during data collection. And I think since we are now at the end of our dissemination workshop, some of the equipment, or all of them, is supposed to be handed over to Ministry of Health and SIMSTAT. So maybe I could call upon the Director General to come, or I can continue to. Okay. Yeah. So these are some of the equipment which is supposed to be handed over to Zimstad and some to Ministry of Health. So for Zimstad, UNICEF is handing over 100 power banks, then 120 tablet stylus, then 103 tablets, 87 tablet bags, solar lantern 34, 17 gas tanks in stove, 11 laptops, 47 jerry cans, 20 liter plastic containers, there are 47. Then power inverters, there are 18. Then for Ministry of Health, UNICEF is handing over 34 whiteboards for use in nutrition surveys. Then they're also going to hand over 34 scales. Thank you very much. I think these are the equipments which are handed over by UNICEF to the other implementing partners of the survey. So can I call upon Dr. Mshanga to give us closing remarks from Minister of Health and Child Care? Dr. Mshanga. Okay.
Thank you very much to the Master of Ceremonies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have come to the end of today's program, but before we break for lunch, I just have a few words on behalf of the Minister of Health and Child Care. I want to begin by recognizing Mr. T. Maonde, the Zimstad Director General. I would also want to recognize Ms. El Moshiri, the UNICEF representative, the EU delegation representative, Patrick Lambert. I think he has left. I want to recognize all representatives of development partners who are here. We have also colleagues from other government ministries, senior government officials, invited guests, the members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Minister of Health and Child Care to give some closing remarks at this very important mixed results dissemination workshop, and also it's been an opportunity for us to get our hands on the mixed reports, the short version, as well as the longer version with all the tables and data. I want to thank the Director General and all the staff who came to the high table here to make all those insightful presentations. I am sure at our leisure, of course, we'll all be able to go through the reports, but going home now, we do have an idea of what came out of the mixed survey, and we want to thank all the presenters for a job well done. The survey, as we heard at the beginning, was carried out in 2019, and this whole process was led by our Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency, And this is all part of a global mix program. So it's not just Zimbabwe that does mix. This is something that is done by a lot of other countries, and the good thing is it allows us to be able to compare ourselves with others to see if we are going the right direction or if we are not, and what to do, and as well as what not to do. I would like to appreciate the technical and financial assistance that we received from the United Nations Children's Fund, here represented by Ms. Moshiri. They, of course, came with technical as well as financial support. The European Union, we also want to acknowledge the tremendous effort that went into making sure that the whole exercise was well funded. Also, we appreciate the UK Department for International Development, or in short DFID, the Embassy of Sweden, as well as the United Nations Population Fund, who also, in one way or the other, made sure that the survey was well supported in terms of either financial or technical aspects. I also want to, on behalf of government and ministry, to show our appreciation to all those who took part in the survey, those who were surveyed, but also I think we must give a round of applause for all the enumerators who worked hard to make sure that the results that were presented here today have been what they are, and have been shared with all of us. We may all know that the MIX program was developed by Unicef, that is in the 1990s, as an international multi-purpose household survey program to support countries in collecting internationally comparable data with a wide range of indicators on the situation of children as well as women. But we saw also from the presentations that we received, we had quite a lot of other indicators that related to education, indicators that related to general social well-being in our communities, issues of access to water, which we discussed here, issues of access to sanitation, and we know these are all issues that have a huge bearing on the health status of the population of Zimbabwe. So this is a very, very key study or survey, and the results really are not standalone. As we look at the results of MIX, we should look at them together with the results of the numerous other surveys that we carry out, such as the ZDHS and so on. So MIX will not be able to answer the whole plethora of questions, some of which were coming from the floor. But if you read MIX in conjunction with other surveys, then you should be able to get some of the key answers that you require. A MIX survey, as any other survey that we carry out here in Zimbabwe, is important in generating useful information that we use for planning purposes. This is information that also guides the policies that we come up with as a country. And for us, it also is useful in terms of allowing us to measure how we are doing towards attaining our sustainable development goals. But we also have local homegrown programs, such as the Transitional Stabilization Program, as well as Agenda 2030. So MIX, together with other surveys, they provide us with the data that shows us where we are going as a country. And I'm quite happy looking at the results that were presented here today in terms of most of the indicators, especially on the health front, most of them we are doing extremely well, except for the neonatal mortality rate, which has gone up from 29 per 1,000 live births to 32 in 2019. But our infant mortality rate, as was presented here, has gone down from 55 to 47. Our under 5 mortality rate is also down. Our maternal mortality ratio is also down. Our adolescent birth rate is also down. The skilled attendance for pregnant women at our institute is also gone up from 80% to 86%. We also see that stunting is also significantly declined from 27.6% to 23.5%. So a lot of indicators are doing quite well, which shows that as a country, despite the challenges that we see, the challenges that we are facing, there is something that we are doing right. And I would urge us all to continue to do those things that we are doing right, to continue doing them and doing even better going forward. So that come the next survey, we hope that we will see that trajectory either going up for those indicators that we want to go up or going down for those indicators that we want to go down. So with these few words, thank you once again for attending this session, and hope again that we meet in other health-related sessions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mshanga, for the closing remarks. I have one last announcement for us to go for lunch. So for the VIPs, we should use this exit door to go for our lunch, and then you get your tickets at the door. Then for the rest of the participants, let's use the back doors. And you are going to be given your meal tickets there. Thank you.